welcome to Raconteurs News.
Good evening and welcome to Raconteurs News this Tuesday night. I'd like to thank Luby for the tunes there. Did a great job. It was almost like going for a drive in the car. We have some similar tunes on there. But we've got a bit of a technical glitch tonight. I know one or two people are having a job getting in and out of the chat room, so stick with us and I hope you get in eventually. We've got a few teething problems as we're moving across towards the new website, but I see we've got a good crowd in the chat room tonight. Unfortunately, the Skype gods are not being very kind to us, and they won't let me set up a group call tonight with Jason and our guest. So I had a quick word with Jason, and he said, don't worry about it, mate. We'll sort it for another time. So unfortunately, you're just stuck with me tonight, and our guest, obviously. But before we introduce the guest, I'd like to say a few words on a rather sombre note. And it was with great sadness this weekend that I saw the reports of the passing of Patrick Cullinan. Now, there's a lot of information being posted online, and we've had no actual definite confirmation that Patrick has passed. So for all those people that are jumping on board and posting all kinds of crazy stuff, please show a bit of respect. And if this news is indeed true, then I'd like to pass on my condolences, or all our condolences here from Raconteurs News and Autonomous Media, to Patrick's friends and family. But that's over, and would like to move on, because tonight we've got a guest that I've been trying to get hold of pretty much since I started on the radio. And as luck would have it, last week we met up with him at Nottingham and had an absolutely fantastic evening. There was a great crowd there at the premiere of The Great British Mortgage Swindle. So without further ado, let's give a big warm Raconteurs News welcome to Michael O'Bernacea. Good evening, Michael.
Good evening, Andy, and to everybody else who's listening. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's an absolute pleasure to get you on, mate. I know Ken, he's from up your part of the world, but he's listening over in Spain, and he'll be absolutely over the moon, because when we first met and I started talking on the radio, he was the first one to suggest your name, and I think he's suggested it probably once or twice a week ever since. But
well, I must apologise for taking on the form of the Scarlet Pimpernel. I have been very busy, as you know, but I also have been, during that period, even more difficult to contact than I was before, so I do apologise for that.
No, I realise you've been in lockdown while you've been putting this project together, and you can see there's an awful lot of hard work gone into it. But before we talk about the film, could you just start by... I know most of our listeners will be absolutely familiar with your story, but for those who are not, could you perhaps give a little bit of a background of who Michael is, a little bit about you, how you grew up, and how you came to be involved in this huge titanic fight that you are now?
Okay. Starting as near to the beginning as is wise, given how much has happened during the course of my life. I did a drama and performing arts degree in Leicester when I was 19 to 22. And during the final year of that degree, I'd come up against every form of authority within the institution, bar the head of the performing arts, which was quite lucky, because he was the only one who recognized exactly what it was that I had that was very difficult to pigeonhole. And basically, I ended up developing a stand-up comedy routine that I launched on the professional stand-up circuit when I left Leicester. I actually did my first gig at the Comedy Cafe in Newcastle, and the compere that night was a certain Dave Johns. And Dave Johns, I'm sure some of you who are fairly au fait with current films will know that Dave Johns is the guy who stars in I, Daniel Blake, And he ended up, I did my first gig, and I did well enough for him to give me my first professional booking. And within a few weeks, I was on the London circuit, and I was fortunate enough to do gigs with some of my stand-up heroes. I was very fortunate. And rather than name drop, I'll move on to the next bit.
Drop a few names in. We'd all love to know who you gigged with, Michael.
Well, I developed a reputation very quickly of being a very energetic performer on the circuit, and as a consequence, I ended up getting put on before many of the big acts on the circuit. And some of those acts were, well, one of the first one that springs to mind would be Eddie Izzard. I warmed up for him at a Pack Club in Twickenham when he did his Le Sage et Don Labre stuff for the very first time. I don't know if anyone's familiar with that, but it absolutely cracked me up. I did the same kind of thing for Lee Evans at the old club on Highbury Corner called TNC2. And I must admit, Lee Evans was one of the nicest people I've ever met in my life, and he was certainly one of the nicest comics, and he was absolutely brilliant. He really was. I can go on, but they were at that level. They were at that level. I was very, very fortunate. Another one I have to mention though before I stop is Jerry Sadowitz. I don't know if anyone knows.
Oh yeah.
Jerry Sadowitz has, for pretty much the last 25 years, been considered the most controversial British comic of all time. And I was lucky enough to see him when I was a student at Leicester, in a packed theatre in Leicester, the Phoenix Arts Centre. And within 18 months of that, I was even more fortunate to be doing gigs with him in London. So, that was my background. I ended up then, when I was 25, I started writing plays. And I put on a couple of plays that I wrote with a theatre company that I co-founded in the mid-90s. And they had excellent reviews, and we ended up selling out 3-week runs at every theatre that we performed in. Even the mainstream media took a great interest and got behind my work, and it was all looking about as rosy as it could. I ended up getting commissioned by an independent guerrilla filmmaking production company called Kino Eye Films to develop one of the plays into a screenplay, and that was basically it. When I went from 25, I was pretty much hooked by the film industry, and I dedicated all my endeavours during that period to getting my foot on the first rung of the ladder. And in '99, I made my very first film, which was a 35mm short film called Roadkill, which was a black comedy about two hillbilly brothers who are both obsessed with the same woman. And one of them is so racked with jealousy when the other gets a date with her that he decides he's going to kill his brother. And it's very blackly comic. And again, we got great reviews. And it ended up being screened against all the odds. It was screened twice on Sky Movie Max. And over 70-odd people, 70-odd thousand people saw the screenings, and I had a feature film that I'd been developing since 1998 called Nefarious, a screenplay, and I had a cast list that was described by virtually every single producer who was much more experienced than me that I met as being the most exciting cast of any British film by a first-time director. And that cast included Oscar-winning Christopher Walken playing one of the leads, the biggest film star of the modern age in Scandinavia, a Danish actor called Kim Bodnia, wonderful actor, and it was in a film called Pusher that some of you might have seen, among many other things, and the TV series that broke out and was remade in the English language, and it escapes my memory at the moment, but if anyone knows Kim Bodnia's work, they'd know that TV series. And basically, I ended up co-producing a film with Kim that Kim starred in, called The Good Cop. And in 2004, we took it to Cannes, and my company, which at the time was called Unspeakably Wicked Pictures, would you believe?
I like that.
And we launched it. We launched it at the Cannes market, and we made such a stir with what was, hand on heart, it was an action comedy in the Danish language with the biggest Danish star, as I say, of his era. And it was the busiest screening of the second week of Cannes in the market, and we did very, very well. And basically, I drew the attention of some, well, the heavyweights of the independent film industry. And as a consequence, within the next 18 months, I ended up being executive producer or producer on 8 different films, 4 of which were Hollywood-type films with A-list stars. One of them was a film, psychological thriller, which was starring Val Kilmer, which still hasn't been made, but through no fault of mine, I have to add. Another one which was due to star Ben Stiller, again, which still hasn't been made. The reason being the director attached was considered too difficult. And now remember that, because when I learned this fact, that certain films didn't get made merely because somebody said, perhaps through Chinese whispers, perhaps because they know people who worked with them, but it can go either way. Either way, people got blacklisted. People got stopped working in the industry. And our company, my partner was a Frenchman who'd lived in London for a long time called Olivier, and we started the company with a view to creating, and this was our aim from the beginning, to create an independent film production, sales, and distribution company that would bypass all of the bullshit within the established film industry, which was about the most prejudiced and difficult to negotiate with of all the industries that I've ever had any kind of dealings with. And one of the things that became very apparent when we were shopping around my first feature film, Nefarious, because Roadkill was a 15-minute short, and even though everybody loved it, and everybody loved the cast list, and everybody loved the script that I'd written, because it was a hard-hitting story about 2 lovable rogues who dreamed of moving to Amsterdam and opening up a coffee shop, but they got sucked into the world of international cocaine smuggling by mistake. And the film is kind of about how they get out of that and what the end result is. And even though everybody loved the project and everything about it, I ended up being in a position where there was no distribution company in the UK or anywhere else in the world that had the balls to take it on. And you have to also understand that at this point in time, 2004, 2005, and before that, and for a certain time afterwards, before the digital revolution allowed for people like me to and yourselves to acquire their own equipment, to put out any kind of media and even distribute it themselves, you were completely at the behest of these prejudiced individuals who already had a list of people, their friends, relations, etc., people who they had already decided they were going to work with, and they kind of go through the motions of saying that they wanted to work with me, and then when it came to a commitment of money or distribution, it never happened. And then something quite extraordinary happened. Through one of the actors who was already cast in the film, as the film was completely cast and all the crew members were in place for almost 18 months, and everybody, they were all top level, they really were. And when we drew a blank finance-wise, one of the actors came forward and said, well, actually my husband happens to be an international film financier, and he's very interested in putting the money in because I want the film to happen. And we ended up getting issued a letter of credit from a Swiss bank, and it was a AAA rated Swiss bank, Bank Hapolim. And it was an irrevocable letter of credit for $9.5 million to make Nefarious, and as I say, the cast included Christopher Walken. There was also a wonderful British actress called Lindsay Duncan, an amazingly electrifying Scottish actor who's still very, very popular called Douglas Henshaw. cracking bloke as well. We had Rufus Sewell attached as well. Kate Ashbury, who was in what's the zombies film? The first zombies film, the zombie comedy film. What's it called?
Oh, was
Very
it
famous one.
Dawn of the Dead?
That's it. She was the girl in that with the short blonde hair. She was attached to it. We even had Howard Marks agree to play a cameo in
Wow.
it as a drug squad detective.
No, that's classic.
Seriously, it was absolutely nuts, and there was no door that wouldn't open. But as I say, when it came down to the decision, there was always some bullshit excuse as to why it wouldn't happen. And then the UK Film Council was founded by the government, and there were a load of established producers, including one of the producers on one of my favourite films, The Usual Suspects, who was head of something called the Premier Fund. There was also a development fund, and lots and lots of money was made available for basically the entire British film industry. However, what we learned through the pain of our own experience is that this project, Nefarious, it was thwarted at every turn, including when we made applications for development finance and then production finance from the Film Council. And a member of the Film Council's senior staff for the first 18 months of its existence ended up founding a production company. And he ended up having a meeting with myself and Olivier, and we were told in no uncertain terms that my very origin was a problem to most people within the film establishment in the British film industry. Now you can imagine, I'd understood certain prejudice towards what very upper class and privileged people tend to term professional northerners. Mm-hmm. But what I hadn't heard, which I heard from his mouth, was that there were two types of producers or screenwriters or directors that nobody in the film establishment would work with when it came down to brass tacks, money on the table to make films, which we all needed at the time, or at least we all thought we did. And he told me in no uncertain terms that Scousers and Geordies drew a blank every time, unless they sold their souls and played the rules the way the establishment wanted them to. But by and large, most Scousers and Geordies, he said, wouldn't play by the rules. Now, I said to him at this point, so which rules are you pertaining to here? And he smiled and he said, you see, that's exactly the kind of question that means you draw a blank every time. And I'm trying to help you here by telling you the truth. Because I think you've got something that the established industry is never going to get behind.
Wow, that is very telling. I mean, I'm blown away. I knew about your career in stand-up comedy, but I had no idea about the work you'd done in film. And we were bowled over when we got Diane Jessie Miller on a few months ago. I don't know if you've seen the film she did with Rick Mayall, One by One.
I have seen it, yes. I really admire what they did.
And by the way, for listeners on the other side of the pond, that is now available on Amazon.com. So if you go to Amazon.com and search One by One, you'll be able to get a DVD copy of that film, because I know it's very hard to get hold of online, and it will be available in Europe and the UK very soon, and the rest of the world, she says. But so, Michael, that was quite a fascinating life you've had. So, how did it all lead you to where you are now?
3 days after 9/11, when I was at a crossroads in my life. Mm-hmm. In the August of 2011, I broke up with my first wife, but there was no acrimony. We still loved each other. It was just we were incompatible. And I broke up with her, and 3 days after I broke up with her, I was commissioned to write a television series by an independent production company. And this television series was my idea. It was entirely my creation, and it was called Geordie Boys, about 3 generations of Newcastle fans based on my own family. And we immediately attracted very, very strong interest from the BBC. And the 2 producers in the production company that commissioned me, they had a very long track record of producing television with the BBC. But I also must insert the caveat, despite that, they were very nice people. Yeah. And so now you get an idea of where it's going to go. So it was 3 days after 9/11, I was waiting to hear about when I was going to be going in for a meeting to basically discuss the production and the financing of the entire series, which was 3 parts, each feature length, during a different era, starting during Jackie Milburn's era and then ending in Shearer's era. Mm-hmm. And basically, everyone was really excited. The 3 heads of department expressed an interest to green light it. And I was waiting for the confirmation of the meeting where this would basically be formalized. And 9/11 happened. I was watching it live completely by accident, because having broken up with my girlfriend, for some reason, she'd left the television on before she went to work, and I was still using the office that I had in the flat that we shared as my office, for around about 10 weeks. And I was walking through the living room where it was on, and I saw what was going on, and I was on the way to the toilet, and my immediate thought was, this is staged. This is completely staged. How do they know who did it so soon? There can't have been any investigation. This is staged. This is somehow rigged. And then I went to the toilet and got on with the rest of my day, and 3 days later, I hadn't been able to forget about it like most other people on the planet. And I decided that I was going to go and look for people who had these doubts on the internet. And at the time, there was no Facebook, or I wasn't aware of anything like Facebook. And I was very, very unaware technically about, how to work the web. And I ended up in a chat room where I met a woman who basically was looking for somebody like me to talk to.
Yeah.
Having the same doubts. And it turned out, and again, she's proven this beyond any doubt, and I've researched every single aspect of what I'm about to say, as some who've read an article on one of my websites may already know. But it turned out that this woman was the ex-wife of a man who was very widely described as Kissinger's right-hand man.
Whoa.
And what had happened was, and again, as I say, I've researched every aspect of this. The only things that aren't available are any trace of her identity, because at the end of our conversations, which lasted around about 7 months, taking place online and even on phone calls that were undoubtedly tapped by the secret services. We could hear things going on the line when it was much more difficult for them to make it secret that they were tapping your calls. And she basically told me that in the 2 years running up to 9/11, she had felt like she was under imminent threat of being murdered by her husband.
Okay.
The reason being that she had been at several lunches with billionaires' wives on the East Coast of America in the run-up to 9/11, where there were conversations going on about the event that was going to take place in New York or somewhere like New York that was going to result in Henry Kissinger's plan coming into fulfillment. In other words, the culling of the useless eaters would begin. And she was horrified because she had a heart. She came from a European aristocratic background, but all she ever wanted, in her own words, was to be a wife and a mother. And she ended up marrying this guy who was East Coast billionaire. stock and didn't have to work for anything and ended up being in this position as Kissinger's right-hand man with diplomatic immunity as well as being a US governor, a politician. And by the way, this guy's identity has been completely removed from the internet. I can't find anything on him at all. But at the time when she was giving me this information, it was all there, including information about her and her family. And that's gone as well. Now, basically, she went back home after one of these dinners, horrified, and her husband had come back from business. He was very tired, and she walked in, and she just blurted it all out. And she said to me, and her voice was so riddled with tension. It was one of those moments where you would just never, ever forget. As long as I live, I could never forget the tension in this woman's voice when she told me on the phone, I knew the moment that I told him that I thought 9/11 was being organized and someone needed to do something about it and that I was going to report it to the media and I wanted his support. I knew the moment I said that he was going to try and have me killed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a fair assumption to make. Yeah,
a fair assumption to make.
Mm-hmm.
So she didn't know what to do. They had two kids, both over 10, and she really didn't know what to do. And she ended up feeling guilty for risking the devastation of their family unit, because she said, before that moment, I absolutely loved him. I thought I was going to be with him forever. I never had any doubt that he loved me. And from that moment onwards, it was like he turned it off. It was like a switch.
Mm-hmm.
But that switch was turned back on a few months later, when they hadn't really talked much about it, but they were walking on eggshells, just keeping up appearances.
Yeah.
And he suggested that they go on a reconciliation stroke second honeymoon break. And he suggested that they go to Africa, that they'd always wanted to go on safari and they'd never been, so even though he'd been there on diplomatic business. And she said, yes, that sounds great. And they booked hotels all around Africa, but one that was specifically where they were going to start was just outside Nairobi. And they went there, and she said it was honestly like it seemed too good to be true.
Yeah.
It was more idyllic than their honeymoon. He was more considerate than he was a considerate man anyway. He was a very polite and considerate man, she said, but it was more than ever. And it was either that he was trying to make it up to her in every way possible, or there was something not quite right. And so she said she never had any ill feeling that it was bad until he suggested that because he'd had an unexpected call that meant that he had to have a breakfast meeting at 6 a.m. Near Nairobi, he suggested that she meet him for lunch when it would be over, and that they meet at the Nairobi U.S. Embassy. Now, those of you who know the history of the organization that has been dubbed Al-Qaeda will know that one of the first atrocities to be alleged to have been carried out by them was the bombing of the U.S. Embassy in Nairobi.
Yes.
And it just so happened that she was sitting in the waiting room and she looked at the clock, and in her own words, she noticed that for the first time since the day she met her husband, he was late for something. And then her heart sank through the floor. Next thing she knew, she was blown out of the building and woke up being resuscitated by a stranger who nursed her back to health at a hospital where there were no staff, because he had history of nursing serious casualties, having formerly been an SAS mercenary. Now, she gave me the name of that SAS mercenary, and I've never made that name public, and I'm not going to now, for reasons that I'm not going to go into, but you can guess. But he also gave me the name of the financier, or rather she gave me the name of the financier of the 9/11 operation, the name of the front company, which facilitated the entire operation, and information which could only be described as potentially the kind of information that could very easily get you killed. Just knowing it. And she's telling me this. I'm on a mobile phone in London. She's in Finland, and she's basically saying to me that she's had a phone call from someone who she doesn't know in the Secret Services who's told her that she better watch out or else. Then the guy formerly in the SAS got in contact with her and said that if they had any more contact between them, they would both be murdered. And he said MI6 are all over it outside of the UK. MI5 are on it in the UK. Everybody in your contact list is under surveillance. And then he said, you better not have told anybody about what you've told me. What I've told you, she only told me and him.
Okay.
Or the detail I'm talking about.
Well, when you first started telling me this, Michael, I was like, wow, this is amazing. I've never heard any. And then just as we got a little bit into the story, I thought, hang on, this story is familiar. I've actually read this story. Did you ever publish it?
I published this a while back, 2 or 3 years back. I published it on my website, but I've never sought to publicize these things. I just wanted to make it public that had happened because of various reasons. The best way to describe it would be as a personal insurance policy, shall we say? Yeah. But I haven't disclosed this level of detail before. Wow. I did disclose to Vinnie Eastwood in an interview a few years ago about this happening. But again, this is I've never gone into this much detail about it.
Well, thank you for sharing that with us, Michael. Feel very privileged for that.
Sorry, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say, so that led you away from your film industry career, but how did it lead you towards challenging the banks?
I finally got word of the meeting with the BBC. And I was sitting in the BBC canteen with the two producers of the series and waiting for one of the heads of department to come down and take us to the room where we were going to have the meeting. And I started, and again, this is very, very soon after 9/11, I started having the same kind of conversation, expressing the doubts about what had happened that I, was talking about earlier. And one of the producers, he went bright red and put his hand on my shoulder and said, you see, Michael, that's why I love you, because you will see things very, very differently. You're always radical in your perspective, and I'm going to get right behind you. But this is the kind of place where you shouldn't say anything like that.
Surprise, surprise. And
bear in mind, the BBC, even before 9/11, had a security system, a security entry system that still rivals the airports in the security at airports today. I've never experienced anything like it. Just getting in the building, it was unreal. And anyway, the upshot was that following this conversation, I don't know how I got round to it, but I was mentioning Dave Johns before, who stars in I, Daniel Blake, gave me my first gig, and Ken Loach is the director of that film, and I knew the producer of the film, Rebecca O'Brien, because we got sent to a co-production workshop at the Vendôme Film Festival by Kodak, all expenses paid. 4 of us, 4 people who they picked, who they thought were going to have, decent careers, and they wanted to get behind us. And I met her then, and she told me that she predicted that I was going to have all these problems because of who I was, but she said, never, ever give up, no matter what. And basically, I started researching Ken Loach's career because of this. And I found out through my own research, when there was hardly anything on the internet about this, but at a later time there was a lot more that I found. But I could ascertain pretty much that him and his producer, Tony Garnett, had been blacklisted by MI5, which had an office in the BBC until 1981. Right? And they vetted everybody who came through, even on a simple contract basis, and as an electrician or technician, as well as every creative type. Yeah. And I didn't pass the test. And it took 6 months, but one by one, the heads of department reneged on their intentions to greenlight the film and then stop taking our calls. And it resulted in these two producers having, as I say, worked with the BBC for donkey's years. They turned their backs on them. They went to other broadcasters. They were horrified. They couldn't believe it. They thought that this was the most exciting TV series that they'd ever been producers of, in their words. And it got stopped. Now, as I said before, we had the letter of credit from the Swiss bank with that huge cast from our feature film. And when all this shit happened with Geordie Boys, we thought, well, at least we've got that. At least that's going to be all right, because who's going to not want to finance a film or distribute a film with that cast? And
of course.
None of them. They all expressed the interest. They all said they would do it, and they all ended up not doing it. And even with this letter of credit, we went to every single bank that cash flowed film in the world, and we were on a conference call to Allied Irish, that one of the directors of Allied Irish, who specialised in the film arm, or she ran the film arm part of the bank, and she had basically agreed in principle. And all she said we had to do was get all of the other parties, the investors and the exec producers, together on a conference call, and that we all agree to sign an inter-party agreement, including her, which is standard practice, or it used to be. And she came on the call, and she was crestfallen. And I asked her what the problem was. There were 6 of us on the call. I asked her what the problem was, and she said, "I don't know how to express this to you, Michael, but this isn't my decision. My hands are tied." And I said, I'm sorry, I've heard that before. And she said, no, I really want you to believe me. I'm telling the truth. And I do believe her. I still believe her to this day. She convinced me.
Yeah.
She said that she'd been given no reason, but she'd been told that the bank would not, under any circumstances, cash flow this film. One reason, the only reason she would accept, was probably the reason why she'd been told to do this. And that was because it was the first screenplay that depicted a drugs culture and characters within it without condemning those characters. And because of that, it was viewed by the establishment that it was condoning the use of recreational drugs. When what it was actually doing was illuminating the total fucking hypocrisy of the drugs laws. Yeah.
I mean, so many people who are still in a very mainstream way of thinking think, oh yeah, war on drugs, brilliant, we need to stop all these junkies. But in reality, we need to address the problem that drives people to addiction, don't we? Rather than just criminalising those who are victims of it.
Yes, but at the same time, we also need to draw a distinction between people who do it simply because they enjoy doing it and it doesn't have a detrimental effect on their life, and people who do it to escape. The latter are the type of people who always end up having serious problems, and the former are the type of people who can live their lives without having those problems. So there can't be any hard and fast rule, simply because of that.
Yeah, of course. So that obviously would have left you in quite a financial predicament. The fact that you've gone all this way with this project, and suddenly they pull the plug at the last minute.
Yes, and it got to a point where I had to make a decision, and that decision was, and I got a phone call from one of the exec producers on the big Hollywood projects, and one of them was a film called Bobby. And Bobby is the story of Bobby Kennedy, the Emilio Estevez film. And I was sent that script when nobody else would go anywhere near it, because they all thought that it wouldn't work. and they didn't want to get behind Emilio Estevez for whatever reason. And the exec producer, who I was already working with, he said, look, I'm friends with him. He's come to me with this script. He's desperate because he's put his heart and soul into it. And even though he's got Paul Newman and a huge cast attached to it, no one will give him any money to make it. And I thought, well, yeah, I'll give it to you and see if you got any ideas. And he gave it to me, and within 12 months, it was in production, and it got nominated for Oscars. And the only reason it didn't win Oscars, given by the critics, and privately within the industry, was the same reason I'd given Emilio when I gave him the notes about the script. I said to him, this has got Oscar potential written all over it. It's one of the most gripping, compelling, and emotive scripts that I've written about a historical event. Everything about it is saying that, the establishment is going to love this film as well as audiences, but it's 20 minutes too long. Mm-hmm. And that was the sticking point. He never cut the script, and consequently, he didn't win those awards, and the criticism was the same that I'd given him that he didn't pay heed to. And I think you can guess that I was left off the credits at the end of all that.
Oh, yeah, that's a shame.
Mm. Even though I was right, and I was responsible for getting it into the hands of the people who actually got it made. So anyway, at that point, I ended up from having what it seemed like that the entire world at my feet to a position where I had to decide whether or not, when my exec producer called me, he said, look, this is your choice. You can give up wanting to make Nefarious and all your serious message type films, because I had a load of those on the slate as well that I was helping other people get made. Mm-hmm. And he says, you can do that and concentrate on the ones that I've given you, which have all got A-list casts, and you'll make a shitload of money, and you can write your own ticket, and then you can make your own films, do what you want. But you need to do this first. No one's going to let you do it unless you do this. Mm-hmm. So I told him, as you probably already know, I told him that I wasn't interested in selling my soul. I'd already had the opportunity to do that, and it's just not possible for me to do it. Yeah. And that I only was in the industry in the first place to make films that people need to see, that will leave them with something that's worthwhile instead of leaving them with memories that they'd rather forget. Or bullshit, propaganda, etc. And the whole industry, literally, there wasn't anybody I couldn't get contact with or open a door to see or to talk to or get a script to. And all of a sudden, the entire industry internationally, man, I was blacklisted. Blacklisted. So I had no choice but to reevaluate everything. Now, what I knew was that within a very short time, it would become possible for me to acquire my own production and distribution equipment, so I wouldn't need to go to any of them and ask for money. I could do it guerrilla style for as little money as possible. And I had a camera, and I decided that I would shoot Nefarious for fuck all money. And I asked all of the cast and crew. I gave message. I said, I won't hold it against any of you if you pull out, because you need the money. You can't work for nothing. But if you want to stay on board, we're going to do it. We're going to do it in 2005, and that's what we did. We had a fantastic cast and a fantastic crew who committed to a 17-day shoot, and we in the end we managed to do everything that was required to complete a film that still hasn't been seen anywhere, but except by a few people on DVD who are friends of mine. And everybody who has seen it, even that small number, they've all said the same thing. They've said this is exactly the kind of thing that people would really like. It's a cult film. It's got cult success written on it. And that is what I set out to make. I set out to make a cult film about the drugs culture, about the hypocrisy of the drugs laws. And after the release of, obviously, the latest film that I've made, which we'll come on to in good time, Nefarious will be coming out remastered with a new soundtrack, by the same guy who's written an absolutely awesome soundtrack for the Great British Mortgage Swindle, a guy called Rick Taylor. And I'm very excited about all those things, but just to finish off this aspect of my backstory, I ended up without a pot. I ended up without a pot to piss in. I was homeless in Spain, believe it or not, and I ended up coming back to Newcastle, where I was born, and I've been here ever since. I was lucky enough within a few short weeks to meet the mother of my children, and we've been together for almost 10 years. And we have a 6.5-year-old daughter who's an absolute force of nature, home educated, unvaccinated, the first not to be registered. And seriously, it's I would not even contemplate for a moment changing any of the shit that's flown in my direction that I've had to deal with, whether I've caused it for myself or others have just thrown it at me out of spite. It doesn't matter. I wouldn't change a single moment, because that is exactly what needed to happen in my life. And as soon as it did, I could see the reason why the establishment attempted to stamp on me until there was no coming back from it. Because they knew, quite rightly, whether it's instinctively or because someone intuitively knew somewhere down the line, that if they gave my voice the attention of the people they can reach with their distribution networks, then I might start saying exactly the things I've been saying for the last 10 years. And I won't stop saying them until enough people have heard the information they need to hear to realize that the entire system, from top to bottom, is not only rotten at its core, it's completely rigged. There is no remedy available for anybody within the system unless you come from a privileged background, or there's some reason why a member of the establishment, meaning the banksters and those who support their institutionalized frauds, which are international in nature, unless you support that network of institutionalized criminality, you haven't got a fucking hope.
No. No, and that kind of brings us nicely to the Great British Mortgage Swindle, I suppose, Michael. Quite an amazing piece of work that you put out there. It was so unfortunate that you had some technical glitches at Nottingham, but I thought you'd done a damn good job on that, and it really hit home the point about the scale of this problem and the complete psychopathy of those involved.
Thank you. Yes, that's very much the intention, to illustrate that and to make it very obvious. In terms of technical problems, well, every filmmaker and distributor of films will tell you that the reason you have test screenings and previews is to iron out those problems. And once all the problems are ironed out, which we appear to be in that position now, we are on the brink of releasing the film with its London preview, which is set to take place at the Art House Cinema in Crouch End at 1 p.m. on the 17th of December, next month. But I'll come back to all of that because we need to start at the beginning.
Yeah, sure.
I sat down with my father around about, oh God, it must have been 2008. Midway, Mother's Day 2008, that's when it was.
Okay.
And I said to him, you've got to accept something which you're not going to like about your situation. And he said, oh yeah, what's that? Now, anyone who doesn't know anything about my dad, and that's most people who are listening,
yeah,
he's a proper bloke. He's a Geordie alpha male. He left school at 15, and he's a self-made man. You know, he's built it up and lost it, and built it up again and lost it, and built it up again and lost it, and he still comes back and builds it up. He'll never stop, but he never lost a thing except through the fraud of people who worked for Her Majesty. He ended up going bankrupt in Thatcher's 80s recession, the first one. And he went bankrupt at a time before the Insolvency Act 1982 had been enacted. And in 1982, when that act came into being, the type of bankruptcy that was imposed upon him became illegal. And that type of bankruptcy was an enforced bankruptcy against a man who had a publicly liable company. He didn't limit its liability by creating a limited company because he didn't have that business acumen at the beginning of his career when he was 23, and no lawyer told him that he should do that to limit his liability. So he ended up accepting public liability for all of the debts of an insurance company that went down in Thatcher's recession, and we ended up, when I was 18, losing our home, and I ended up having to oversee the whole thing because my mother was having a nervous breakdown, and my dad took her away because he thought it might kill her to get actually evicted, and I had to I dealt with it all on my own in the middle of my A-levels. But anyway, that never left me. It never left me, and I knew from the research I'd done from around about 2001 onwards that by the time we got to 2008, my dad was in serious trouble. He'd started the decade having no debts and £2 million worth of property in a family property trust. And he was getting near the end of the decade, and he had more than $2.5 million of alleged debts, having paid more than $2.25 million in the alleged debt to the bank. And I sat him down and I said to him, they haven't lent you a penny. They've conned you into believing that they're investing in your business acumen when all they want to do is saddle you with a debt that you've got no hope of paying off. And at the time, he didn't want to accept it, And I understand that. It took a while, but 6 months later, we started talking about it again. And by the time we got to February the 19th, 2010, he'd asked me to accompany him. He's the founding trustee of the Family Property Trust, and he asked me to accompany him as the agent of the trust, because I can't represent the trust as a trustee because I'm beneficiary, and it is possible to do that, but neither of us wanted to do that. Neither of us wanted for me to become a trustee for various reasons which aren't worth going into. But we ended up in a situation where I was acting as the agent of the trust, presenting in his presence a promissory note made payable to bearer to one of the directors of Bank of Scotland in their Edinburgh offices. And we had a 4.5-hour meeting, during which time this director, he was pulling his hair out, he was sweating. He left to have phone calls and conference calls with various people, including Bank of Scotland's lawyers. He contacted 2 board members of the Lloyd's Group, and he also contacted someone who he described as a member of the Banking Council. And he claimed, when he came back at the end of the meeting, that none of them, nobody at Bank of Scotland, in fact, had any idea how to deposit a promissory note.
That beggars belief.
It does, yes. So we told him that under Section 43 of the Bills of Exchange Act 1882, his refusal to accept that note would discharge any purported debt of the trust. And at this point, he pulled the note to his chest and said, I'm going to have to get back to you on this because I'm going to have to take a lot of advice on it. And 3 days later, we did get the note received back with a letter saying that they refused payment and that they didn't accept the validity of the legal arguments. And they issued, not long after that, a statutory demand for £2.5 million of compound interest. And we issued them with a demand for a list of material evidence which demonstrated 3 things. A, that there was a valid mortgage in existence. B, that there was a valid mortgage contract, and C, that they had actually lent the trust any money in the first place.
And you're never going to get that, are you?
You're never going to get that. But when we sent that, to the best of my knowledge, nobody except Michael O'Dara had ever sent anything like it. And of course, Michael O'Dara had met the year before during the run-up to his attempt to challenge the validity of a mortgage that Bradford and Bingley were attempting to enforce against him after he'd lived in his home for 15 years and realized that in all likelihood they hadn't lent him any money. And when all he did was ask them the same questions, just, can you provide the material evidence that there is a mortgage, there is a contract, and you did lend me the money? And he got the same response. And not many people know this, but this is something which I am adamant needs to be recognized.
Mm-hmm.
Whilst Jerome Daly is recognized internationally as the first man who stood up in any court and challenged the validity of a mortgage in an American court in 1969 in the Credit River case, Michael was the first to stand up, to the very best of my knowledge, and say that there was no loan of money in one of Her Majesty's courts. And that was in August 2009. And I ended up helping him launch his appeal. And we'd been talking in the run-up to the first hearing when the possession order was issued. And over the course of the next 15 months, there were a series of evictions that were wonderfully and effortlessly resisted at Michael's home. But and a real interest had caught fire in the local area. Everyone he knew in the vicinity was coming to support him against the bailiffs and eventually against the police. And what we discovered, to our, I must admit, it was horror. It was horror. What we discovered was that there weren't any lengths to which a court or a judge would go. Sorry, there weren't any lengths that they wouldn't go to evict someone from their property, even when there was absolutely no material evidence whatsoever that there was a valid mortgage in existence. And I tried to explain this to my dad, and eventually the penny dropped. And when we took on the proceedings against the bank, I said to him at the beginning, you've got to be prepared to issue proceedings against them. We've got to take it to them like we did with the promissory note. And we knew eventually we would have to issue proceedings against them. And that's what we did. We issued the proceedings in August 2010. October the 22nd, 2010, I'm in the High Court for the very first time presenting a case on my own against a barrister who's since been made a QC called David Quest, who was regarded, according to Wikipedia, as the #1 barrister of his generation, and he's been awarded and subsequently rewarded for what he did. Mm-hmm. And basically what happened was the judge, I did initially believe that he pretended that there was a valid contract signed by both parties, which there has to be, in accordance with Section 2 of the Law of Property Miscellaneous Provisions Act 1989 applies to every single mortgage except a regulated mortgage. If there's not a standalone bilateral contract signed by both parties, including all of the terms and conditions, there are no enforceable conditions that the bank can seek to enforce in a court. By the same token, if there's no mortgage deed which complies with Section 1 of the same Act, the 1989 Act, the Law of Property Miscellaneous Provisions Act 1989, if there's no deed which is signed by the mortgagor in the presence of a witness, and then that witness must, at the moment of execution, attest to the signature in accordance with Section 1.3 of the 1989 Act, if that doesn't happen, there is no mortgage deed. It's void under Section 52.1 of the Law of Property Act 1925. Now, you can imagine, I'm a Geordie. My dad was the first one not to go down the pit in our family. You know, I'm the next generation. Me standing in court, spouting all of this, to judges and barristers who've had a privileged upbringing and experience thus far, it's about the last thing that they are ever going to swallow.
Yeah.
And they didn't. They literally tried to hound me out of every single court, and eventually, when we exhausted every single remedy available, we appealed to the Court of Appeal. The Court of Appeal say you can't have a hearing to even put your arguments. We're backing the judge. There was a valid contract. Section 2 of the 1989 Act does not apply to your case. Oh, well, that's interesting. That's interesting because our case is a mortgage case. And every equitable mortgage that is not a regulated mortgage under different statutes, every such mortgage absolutely must comply with every single part of the 1989 Act. So we went to the Supreme Court in July 2011 and we put these arguments. We said, look, there's all these binding authorities which prove that our arguments have been correct from the beginning. There is no existing valid mortgage contract complying with Section 2 as per United Bank of Kuwait v. Sahib, 1976, in which the three Supreme Court judges, they weren't Supreme Court at the time, they were Court of Appeal, one in particular, Peter Gibson, he stated that from the enactment of the 1989 Act, no mortgage would arise without a Section 2 compliant contract. And we put this case to the Supreme Court along with other cases like Murray v. Guinness, 1998, in which Lightman J. said that sometimes there are so many problems with a mortgage contract that no part of it could ever be sensibly enforced if it does not comply with Section 2. And again, Supreme Court wrote back, sent the bundle back. It was the you can't get any case into the Supreme Court without going through the registrar of the Supreme Court. There's just no way to do it. And basically, the registrar at the time was Louise de Mambro, who also sat at the time as the registrar of the Queen's Privy Council. Who are the majority stakeholders and shareholders in the Lloyds Group, including Bank of Scotland? Would that be Her Majesty's Treasury by any chance?
Yeah.
Yes. So, we went to the Court Funds Office in London. For those of you that don't know, the Court Funds Office is an office that is supposed to hold money and securities and other property in lieu of settlement. So, in other words, let's just say that you had given cash to another party and that party claimed a debt for that amount of cash from you and refused to accept the cash and then issued proceedings against you under Part 36 of the Civil Procedure Rules regarding defence in the event of tender having been made and refused. Under that CPR rule, you are at liberty, as we attempted to do, to pay that promissory note because it had been refused under the Bills of Exchange Act, to pay that promissory note into the Court Funds Office in order to stop Bank of Scotland attempting to rob all my family's properties. And we went, in the end, after having our correspondence ignored and dismissed out of hand without dealing with any of the issues we raised, we ended up, myself, my dad, and the other trustee of the trust, we ended up having a meeting in the lobby of the Court Funds Office with the chief administrator and the government mandarin in charge of enforcing the statutory regime regarding the Court Funds Office. And I presented them with a list of the Court Funds rules. I believe it was Court Funds Rule number 14 that we were relying on, and we were saying that there was no doubt that they could accept any form of security, including a promissory note. And we demonstrated beyond any doubt that a promissory note was a type of negotiable security, and because this promissory note was made out to pay the bearer, it was every bit as good as cash because it was exactly the same in form as the promissory notes we know as legal tender or money.
Wow.
So even though they're not the same thing. But that we're not going to get bogged down in that at the minute.
Mm.
So it's credit. In other words, it's credit, because there is no real money. It's only credit. There's only credit and debits. And we gave them a credit that they could have accepted at the court funds office, just like we did at the bank. And just like the bank, they said, sling your hook. We wouldn't accept it without a court order, and we don't believe you're ever going to get a court order. And they were right. We didn't get a court order, so we let that one go. And then we approached one of the judges from one of the cases that we were relying upon, Lightman J, even though he'd retired. And we asked him if he would consider becoming the sole arbitrator in an international arbitration case that we were starting, or the trust was starting to resolve the matter. And he agreed that he would arbitrate it, but he could only do it as sole arbitrator if we got a high court judge to order that he had jurisdiction to do so. And of course, we knew that wasn't going to happen. No. So we had to move on. So we ended up in 2012 going back to the High Court and making an application to judicial review the original judgment of Judge, the first Judge Walton, who'd issued the first order against us dismissing the claim. And remember this name. A judge called John Behrens came out with a big smile on his face, and there was a notice on the door saying that he'd been specifically appointed by the Secretary of State that day to deal with our application on the door of the court. And so I'm standing up. This is my second time in the High Court. I'm standing up. I present the arguments, all the case law, and he describes all my arguments as erudite. He commends me on the number of authorities that I've researched and I've used very cleverly and passionately. But the High Court doesn't have the jurisdiction to correct the mistake of Judge Walton, even if Judge Walton was wrong that the bank had signed any agreement with the trustees, which it was obvious before Judge Walton, in evidence, that hadn't transpired and he made the mistake. Even though that's the case, it's res judicata, already decided, nothing we can do about it, thank you very much. So I said, will you allow me to say anything further? Because I'd like to make a statement. Mm-hmm. And he said, yes, you can make a statement. And I told him, point blank, a system of justice that does not deliver justice is void ab initio and needs to be struck down. And I haven't changed my position, despite what's happened since then.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the whole thing's bent from start to finish. We need to get rid of it and start again, don't we?
Yes. There's no fixing it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, normally after the first hour, we break for a tune so we can grab a quick cuppa or have a pee break if we need it. But I didn't want to stop you in your flow there and interrupt the flow of what you were talking about. So perhaps if we go for a quick tune now, and this is one that I've been dying to play, but I've been saving it especially for you, Michael, because it's just so fitting on what you're talking about. So it's all right with you. We'll be back in just over 4.5 minutes. And welcome back to Raconteurs News. We had a fabulous first hour there with Michael Obanisia. And miracle of miracles, Skype started working again, and we've been able to bring Jason back in. Welcome back, Jason.
Hello.
Okay, so Michael, we just finished the first hour with you in court there. Would you like to carry on?
Yes. Judge Behrens finished the dismissal of our judicial review application to attack Walton's first order. He dismissed that as totally without merit, as Walton had dismissed our original application and claim. And that is something that anybody who takes on the system, specifically over the mortgage issue, will become very quickly accustomed to, because every application and claim made or defense made by a litigant in person over a mortgage issue with a bank results, doesn't matter what they argue, unless they win through blind faith, war of attrition, and they refuse to back down, which is virtually nobody, but some do, then you get completely shafted. You get dismissed as totally without merit every single time, and that means that they have to consider whether or not to issue a civil restraint order against you. And they issued one, Barron's issued one straight away against me, a limited civil restraint order, which prohibited me from making any further applications in those proceedings. So we dropped those proceedings immediately, and we planned our second claim. And during the course of that summer, we'd gotten ourselves into a position where the vast majority of the people who lived in the properties that were within the trust were either rental properties or commercial properties, and they refused to pay their rents and leases to the receivers for pretty much the first 2 years, all bar two of them. And then in the end, the receivers made threats against them, saying they would take them to court if they didn't start paying the receivers. So the receivers drained the trust of all the funds that it had initially to fight the legal battle. And you must also bear in mind, the trust had paid more by almost 50 grand. They paid more than the bank alleged to have loaned them. So the only obligation could be a contractual one to pay compound interest. So without a contract, there was nothing to pay. But in any event, because they refused a bona fide tender of payment, which they could have deposited and cleared the alleged debt, it was discharged under the Section 43 of the Bills of Exchange Act. So we had them on every angle. And then we discovered in 2013, in the spring of 2013, that every single one of the mortgage deeds, which the receivers had sworn under oath, they'd checked in detail to make sure for their own peace of mind that every mortgage was a valid one under which they were appointed as LPA receivers. And they never mentioned one very critical point, which has already come back to haunt them, and most people aren't even aware of. And that is that in every single set of mortgage conditions, there is a power of attorney clause. And the bank whose legal representatives wrote these conditions purports that upon the mortgagor's signature, upon the deed, they are contractually obliged to adhere to all those terms and conditions. But those terms and conditions don't have to be served upon the mortgagor to be enforceable. They only have to be mentioned in a mortgage deed. Now, if a mortgage deed refers to terms and conditions, and those terms and conditions weren't served upon the mortgagor, they're not binding upon the mortgagor because they're unenforceable under the Unfair Terms in Consumer Contracts Regulations 1999, which prohibits the enforcement of any terms that were unfairly imposed upon a party, and that includes, without limitation, any terms that weren't fairly negotiated, and they weren't negotiated at all. So, and we were making this point along with another point, which again I talked about in depth online on various forums and on my website at the beginning of the case. Under the Companies Act 2006, I believe it's Section 42, but it might be 44, which replaced a section in the previous Companies Act, which was basically pertaining to whether or not a bank has to get either a director or a secretary to sign any kind of agreement or contract or instrument in order for it to be valid, which it does, and has had. All the banks have had to do that in theory since 2006. But of course, none of the courts, or virtually none of the courts, have recognized this. So in every sense, if you are sitting on a purported mortgage where you're paying compound interest, which it's virtually impossible to ever pay off by design, the only obligation that you would ever have to pay that off is if you sign, for whatever reason, in madness or whatever, if you signed a bona fide enforceable contract that complies with Section 2 of the 1989 Act. And if you didn't, there's nothing to enforce against you. So we were making this argument and then simultaneously realized that every single deed was invalidly witnessed in breach of Section 1.3 of the 1989 Act. So we put in a It was originally 13 AP1 applications at the Land Registry. And an AP1 application is an application to alter the register. And with those AP1 applications, we submitted witness statements backing every one, attesting to the facts, which were that, to the best of our knowledge, A, there was no enforceable mortgage contract, and B, there was no enforceable mortgage, and therefore all of the purported mortgages registered by the Land Registry must be cancelled, and the trustees must be indemnified as to all the losses or any losses incurred. Now, at that point in time, when we made those applications, we still had all of the properties in the trust. They were still there. And whilst the tenants and the leaseholders ended up, as I said, having to give their payments every month to the receivers, and the receivers ran every single property under their management into the dirt, and then started marketing the properties at an average of 15% of their market value, we knew we had to take drastic action. Yeah. Within the space of 3 days, we did these three things. The first thing was we served a commercial lien upon both the receivers, Messrs. Glenn and Murphy of DTZ. We served this lien upon them, and their lawyers absolutely freaked out because we were making a claim against them under a common law lien that they had committed fraud and trespass with conversion, and we were intimating that we were going to take this affidavit and file it as part of an information in a private criminal prosecution, which is exactly what we did the day after. We alleged that the receivers and the bank had breached section 2 or 3. Actually, no, it wasn't. I correct myself. It was section 2, 3, and 4 of the Fraud Act 2006. And we were alleging that not only had they falsified their testimony or given false testimony for material gain, they had failed to disclose the fact that one of the mortgages didn't even have the trustee's name on it. It had a private limited company that was in the Southwest, which the trustees had never heard of, as the mortgagor and, in theory, the registered proprietor or owner of the property. And the property in question was a property called Ashcorn House. And those who aren't familiar with the case will need to remember that, because that's going to become a primary. I'm going to be talking about that a whole lot more. Now, it wasn't just that. It was the fact that there was not a single mortgage that had been signed by the trustees in the presence of a witness. Every single witness signature was added after the moment of execution in a completely different place. In fact, none of the witnesses had actually visited the place where the trustees executed the documents. So it was a slam dunk. We even got the conveyancing solicitor, who was also a founding trustee of the trust, Tim Gray. We even got him. And he was a very experienced and respected commercial lawyer of 30 years, one of the few lawyers who I've ever actually had any respect for. And he basically stood by the trust as long as he could. And in the end, he was threatened by his partners and their insurance company that he may lose his pension if he had any further communications with me and my dad until the whole dispute was settled. But that meant we couldn't rely on either him to file applications at the Land Registry or the courts, which makes it a lot easier. As anyone who as a litigant in person has tried to make those filings, they know how difficult it is to make them, or it can be, certainly. But more than that, it was obvious, because around about the same time, Michael O'Dara, after giving notice to his conveyancing solicitor that he was suing them for professional negligence on the same grounds, his firm's solicitors issued the same ultimatum. He wasn't allowed to talk to Michael either until it was all resolved. And of course, that isn't resolved either. Now, you imagine this. In the spring of 2013, we've got applications into the Land Registry, having not lost a single property to the receivers when they were marketing them. And we ended up, because we issued the criminal proceedings after the lien, and then we went into the civil court, the High Court again, Chancery Division, on the third day, applying for an injunction. And we ended up before Walton, the judge who dismissed the claim in the first hearing, and we basically initially assumed that the same was going to happen. But what did happen, it was remarkable considering all the crap that we'd been shoveling through. He basically said that after I launched a verbal assault, which must have lasted 2.5 minutes, demonstrating, holding up the evidence, saying that there is no signature on the purported contract upon which you founded your judgment, and every single argument we've put to another court has been thrown out, so you need to help us. And he acknowledged that he may well have made that error, and he didn't apologize, but he was quite apologetic in his manner, and he helped us in that hearing, which was ex parte. The other parties weren't there. He wouldn't grant an injunction to prevent the receivers selling the properties, but he did defer the application to another High Court judge, and that judge was Judge Kay, another QC. And we ended up before him a couple of months later in the High Court in Newcastle, and I have no idea why it happened on this day, but he was utterly psychotic. He wouldn't let either me or their barrister speak for longer than 5 seconds without interrupting us and castigating both of us for anything, just making it up. And at one point, he was sitting there tearing his hair out. And he said, "Oh, this is becoming so tedious. You won't stop making the same points again and again and again." And I said, "You want to try and see how tedious it is fighting miscarriages of justice?" To which he replied, "Quite."
Pompous fart.
Pompous fart, exactly.
So,
Now,
sorry, this is going on for quite a long time, isn't it? I mean, I'm just amazed with the amount of information that you've got in your head. What sort of effect was it having on your family?
Well, the two properties that were affected by the dispute within our family, because, you know, in the end, from the beginning, I agreed with my dad that the most important priority was making sure that my parents' house and my sister's house, and she has 2 kids and a husband, and the priority was that those properties weren't taken. And because when the dispute arose, my sister and my mother were already tenants for life in those properties, the value of those properties depreciated to less than 8% of their value, and the receivers gave up on them. They haven't attacked, though they haven't attempted to steal those properties in pretty much, it's getting on for 5 years now because of that reason. And because of that, my sister and my mother were able to kind of, you know, to stay on the periphery of everything. They've obviously known what was going on, but they've tried to avoid the incredible stress and pressure of such a situation, as I'm sure you and everybody else listening understands perfectly well. When you're faced with losing your home, there is no comfort. None. No. So because my home that I share with my wife and daughter and her animals isn't within the trust, we've never been under threat. I've been fighting this from the beginning for my family, because I made a pledge to myself when I was 18 that no matter what happened after the first time all the Queen's men stole my family's home, I was going to do everything I could to make sure that it never happened again.
Yeah.
But the amount of knowledge that you've attained, and the way that you're so eloquently, if I can say that eloquently, you can lay it out in a way that, I mean, I was sort of losing a bit at the end of the first hour when I was listening in, because it is so complicated. And it amazes me the amount of information that you keep in your head.
Well, I understand that it can, especially because you missed 15 minutes. And as is true of the film, if you miss 15 minutes of the film, or if you miss 15 minutes of this interview, you're going to get lost. You are. You can't miss any of it, because every single part of it is a piece of the jigsaw. And if you don't have the whole jigsaw, you're never going to see the full picture, are you?
No, absolutely not. But like you say, the whole system's corrupt, and it is. Would you say that it's overly complicated? Well, I think I know the answer to this one, but is it overly complicated to put people off, so people then have to go, and it's expensive lawyers that can only understand the lingo, and they're in on the game anyway. So, do you think it's deliberate?
No, I don't. I think it's completely. It's a symptom of the problem. The problem is institutionalized mortgage fraud, and a symptom of that is the widespread cognitive dissonance that it couldn't possibly be true that the banks don't lend any money and that every mortgage issued since September the 26th, 1989 is void and illegal. That would mean there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of possession orders issued by judges and procured by legal professionals that are, in effect, criminal, but they're also civilly liable for all the damages inflicted upon people. I mean, let's just get something straight here. Over the last 10 years, according to the Council of Mortgage Lenders, there have been more than 250,000 people genocided by eviction on these lands, and 84% of those, again, Council of Mortgage Lenders figures, were families, owner-occupiers. Mm-hmm. And the reason why you need to get every piece of the jigsaw is because your cognitive dissonance won't disappear until you see it for what it is. They dress it up and they try and claim that it's simple. This is just a simple mortgage issue. Did you have the money? Did you buy your house? Well, no matter what you say, they will proceed against you and take your property if you don't continue paying the compound interest. Now, let's just get something else. Let me clarify something else. One of the main reasons that I've been motivated to push myself physically and mentally and probably emotionally further than I've ever pushed myself before to get this film to the point that it's at. And by the way, for anyone who doesn't know, it's been completely and utterly re-edited for reasons that I won't go into, but some of those reasons are legal reasons. Nevertheless, what has happened to it as a result is, despite the fact you need every part of the story to understand why the conclusions are true, the conclusions, nevertheless, are effortlessly simplistic. Mm-hmm. And here is the simplicity of institutionalized mortgage fraud, as exposed and illuminated in the film, in a nutshell. If you have a mortgage, did you sign a mortgage deed granting a mortgage over a property before you owned it?
Yes.
Then you don't have a mortgage, not a legal one. You have an illegal and void one, because under the Land Registration Act 2002, I believe it's section 24 or 26, you must be either the registered proprietor, i.e. the owner of the property when you sign that deed, or entitled to be, but you're not entitled to be until you've bought it. Can I ask you another question?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Did you receive the money before you signed the mortgage deed?
No.
Then you're entitled to put in an AP1 application with a witness statement attesting to the facts on the grounds that A, you weren't either registered proprietor or entitled to be registered proprietor at the time that you signed the mortgage deed, and or, if this also applies, you didn't have your signature on that mortgage deed properly attested to by an independent witness who was actually in the room when you signed it, in breach of Section 1.3 of the 1989 Act, which is, and this we need to finish off, because we haven't gotten to the end, to the denouement of the story, and that is, we ended up, despite having our second claim that the bank and the receivers had committed fraud upon the court by lying under oath about all the mortgages being legally valid, which they had, to procure the judgment, which is the very epitome of fraud upon the court. Despite that, that claim was dismissed as totally without merit, and the bank issued proceedings against the trustees for the compound interest that they claimed. And they initially attempted I must admit, they were goaded by me somewhat, because I wrote a letter to them saying, the way you and your client are acting, anyone would think that you're on the brink of using the power of attorney clause in the mortgage conditions to create a new mortgage. And they weren't actually on the brink of doing that, but I knew that if they were presented with the idea, then they might well do it. And that's exactly what they did. And they applied to have a new mortgage created under the power of attorney, and the High Court hearing was upon us. And on the morning of the High Court hearing, which was in Leeds, and my dad was having to defend himself because there was an extended civil restraint order against me, banning me from every court in the country, so I couldn't represent the trust anymore. And basically, even though I was still helping with all the legal work, obviously, and basically, my dad was arguing all these points, the Section 1 point, the Section 2 point, and Berens was being very antagonistic and didn't want to listen, but he was very uncomfortable. And then after the first morning, the barrister stood up and acknowledged that subsequent to a letter that he'd written to the court explaining the situation, which the trustees had never received, he acknowledged that without a standalone power of attorney deed, which must comply with the Power of Attorney Act 1971 and be a standalone deed signed by the mortgagor, without that, there is no power of attorney granted in the standard mortgage conditions. And guess what? That means everything that the bank and their lawyer or your lawyer do in your name is illegal and fraudulent. It means every statement of truth on any instrument or document they signed in your name under power of attorney or acted in your name under power of attorney is illegal and fraudulent. And that point was established before we even got into the nuts and bolts of the argument over Section 1. And inevitably, what happened was my dad said to Berens, because of the way he treated me on that previous occasion I was telling you about when he issued the first civil restraint order, he basically told Berens that he was applying for him to recuse himself, which is to remove himself from the proceedings on the grounds that he'd shown extreme prejudice to us. And he refused, and he gave me dad the chance to duck out the proceedings. My dad decided to stay because he didn't want to leave the proceedings, to go where they would without anybody being there. And it's a good thing that he stayed, because in the end, Judge Berens could not rule anything else other than, because there were no witnesses' signatures on the mortgage deed to Ashcorn House, that property I was relating to earlier.
Yep.
Because of that, it was void and illegal under Section 1.3 of the 1989 Act. That point had never, ever been established in a civil court. Never. Wow. It had been established in a previous criminal case in or rather Mercury Tax Group v. HMRC, which I think was in 2010. They'd gone into it there, but the civil courts wouldn't even look at that. Our case was the first to do it. And what this resulted in, not long after that, is the property chamber, they basically were asked by the trustees to review a decision of the chief land registrar to refuse our decision to cancel the mortgage over Ashcorn House and all the others. But Ashcorn House is the one that everybody focused on because that one didn't have any space for signatures and it had the wrong name in the mortgagor's place. And basically, the property chamber were asked to overrule the chief land registrar, which had never, ever happened. And that's exactly what they did. And they ruled in our favour. That mortgage got cancelled. In the meantime, 9 properties were stolen and sold at fire sale prices by the receivers. And we subsequently renewed all the applications to cancel all those mortgages retrospectively. And after all this time, we're in a position where the property chamber are on the brink of making a landmark decision. Over the course of the last 12 to 18 months, we have convinced the Land Registry at Durham that all our points have been correct from the beginning. And we are right on the brink of the property chamber making a ruling that the final and last attempt to sell Ashcorn House at a fire sale price by the receivers is going to be cancelled on the basis that there is no valid power of attorney in existence and that they're bound by our case to rule that way. And when they do, that will result automatically in all our outstanding applications to have all of the receivers' entries, which is dozens and dozens since July 2010, cancelled retrospectively, and the chief land registrar under the Swift Limited case from 2015 is bound to indemnify the trustees as to all the losses incurred from the beginning.
Wow.
That is absolutely huge. I mean, going back to my personal experience, I mean, yes, I got my head round the basics of the mortgage fraud. But I distinctly remember, I've only ever been party to one mortgage, and I remember sitting in the solicitor's office, and he was saying, "Oh, you signed this," and I went, "Hang on, that's saying that I'm putting my house up as security, but I don't own that." "Oh, it's just a legal technicality. You don't need to worry about that." And then also the bit at the end where they say, "Oh, yeah, the witness, yeah, we leave that blank and we get that dated and signed when it's all gone through." Both of those are massive, massive issues, aren't they?
Massive issues. And the legal professions are, I mean, this is bizarre, but this is what they're claiming. The legal professions who've had these arguments put to them, the ones who are taking them seriously, because the rest just pretend that they're full of shit. As other people on the internet will do. But nevertheless, the legal professions are claiming, "Oh, well, no, the signature that you sign, or the mortgagor signs before they own the property, because we don't put the date on it because the signature is held in escrow until they own the property." Hang on a second. Where is the authority under which that argument has any substance? Where is it? Doesn't exist.
I'm presuming there is none, yeah. But also, just going back slightly, Michael, Dave Jarvu raised a really good point, and he said it's referring to the appeal court judge that said he couldn't correct the decision even if the judge had made a mistake. Yeah. He says, "I want this idea that the appeal court judge didn't have jurisdiction to change the outcome explained by the judges. How could any appeal succeed ever if they don't have jurisdiction? The statement the judge made needs rebutting, but first we need to ask for an answer as to why they claim not to have jurisdiction."
That really is, I agree, that's an excellent question. And we asked exactly the same question, or we posed the same question of the Supreme Court, and I already explained what happened. They sent it all back. Yeah. And they wouldn't accept it when we tried again. The second time, they just shredded everything. The second time, they didn't even send it back. But they told us in no uncertain terms that under the civil procedure rules, you see, there's an obscure civil procedure rule or practice direction, which means that if you get dismissed as totally without merit, remember, totally without merit. Yeah. If you get dismissed as totally without merit, then the next judge, if you appeal, has to consider whether or not to put a civil restraining order on you, and from that point onwards, there's no further route of appeal. So let's just say you start in the county court, you appeal to the Court of Appeal or to the High Court. Just one totally without merit will mean that your first appeal, if dismissed as totally without merit, that'll mean you can't go to the next court, to the highest court.
Right.
It's a total scam.
Yeah.
It is. It is a total scam. The civil procedures are a total scam, though, aren't they?
They are. Justice is not obtainable for the people. It never was. They've made it look like it was, but it's only available for the establishment, and it has to be bought. The system is rigged to such a degree that the judges, and again, it's not just my theory, because if you look into the oaths that the judges take to the Queen when they take office, you see all the evidence that what I'm saying isn't just a theory, it's backed up by fact. But again, I can't prove it because I haven't got the testimony of the individuals involved or the confessions. But nevertheless, their oath involves not making an oath to uphold justice, truth, and right above everything else, but to protect the reputation of the judiciary in the public mind above everything else. That means the judges have now taken the position, and this is an absolute fact, there isn't anybody who can prove that I'm wrong on this, and everybody who I know I've discussed this with, who's been on the front line for anywhere near as long as I have, agrees. The judges are proving that they are protecting the public's perception of justice being obtainable, and pretending that all of the arguments that everybody on the front line has been arguing about institutionalized mortgage fraud are a whole load of wishful thinking and sad, lonely bollocks.
Yeah, we're getting some very encouraging comments here in the chat room, Michael. Paul Webster's just chipped in there. He says, brilliant info, Michael. and he's just talking about his own experience. He says the courts are taking you into a common law jurisdiction. Did you agree to pay X amount per month in your primary deemed contract? If you argue about credit being monetised, that is equity, and they carry on with stealing your property because you aren't arguing in the correct jurisdiction. Any thoughts on that one?
Yes, I understand the argument, and I got a lot of respect for the man who's given the comment. So I appreciate his support. He's always been very supportive of the stuff that I've been doing. Now, having said that, I also have to say that because of my knowledge of the Judicature Acts from the 1800s, which basically created a system of law on these shores, which meant that every single type of jurisdiction at all times coexists with an equity jurisdiction in every court. So there's an equity jurisdiction in every single court, doesn't matter what type of court it is. Mm-hmm. And it states it clearly in those acts. So that's my position on the subject.
Okay.
But it's a very interesting subject in and of itself. And again, obviously, you already have worked out there's a fair bit that all of this stuff, by the way, just to fully answer the point that you made before, Jason, the fact is that you ask how I remember all this information. I tell you how. I never sat down and tried to remember it. I had to absorb it, because if I hadn't, my family would have gone down the plug hole. And I remembered it because I know that I'm never going to have a team of lawyers sitting there backing me up and passing me the right bits of paper to read from. I know I've got to know it. And anybody who witnessed it was one of the most bizarre and disgraceful experiences of my life. But when the judge in Tom Crawford's appeal a couple of years ago, Judge Godsmark, when he refused to let me speak for Tom, when Tom's health was in a very, very tricky situation and he was having difficulty remembering things, and he explained this to the judge, and he asked him to let me act as an amicus curiae, a friend of the court, and he wouldn't do it. And I ended up having to make all the submissions very loudly in Tom's ear for pretty much the whole of the hearing. And it got to the point where Tom was, every few minutes, he was just shouting. He said, "He's saying it so loud you can hear it. Will you not let him say it to you?" "No, I won't let him speak. I won't let him speak." Right? So from that position, we ended up, and again, it's documented. There were so many people filming this that there's no way that they could ever eradicate it from the internet. But basically, there came a point where the solicitors for Walker Morris, who were prosecuting Tom for Bradford and Bingley, they were sitting there open-mouthed because they couldn't believe that I was rattling off all these points, and I wasn't referring to any notes, and they hadn't heard of any of the points. And Tom won the argument that day. I don't care what anyone says, he won the argument. And it's not proven in the transcript because certain things aren't in the transcript which transpired in the hearing. And one of those things is, at a certain point in time, those who remember it well, who were there or saw the news about it, all of a sudden, because there'd been 300 to 400 people congregated outside the court.
Yeah, I was one of them, by the way.
Right, there you go. Then you know. Because all of you guys out there who were there to support Tom, and you know, everybody knew what was likely to happen. It almost always goes against us. But when we got to a point where we'd won the argument, we'd absolutely nailed it to the mast, everybody outside started chanting, "Do your job, do your job, do your job." Mm-hmm. And at that point, we assumed in the court that they, as did the judge, that they were targeting that at him. And he immediately panicked. He was crestfallen. He said, "If this continues, I'm going to have to abandon the court." But clearly he was very, very worried about how he was going to get out of the court.
Yeah.
So unless they had a secret entrance, he had to stay there. He would have been a prisoner until everyone left, unless the police did something. The police who were there, most of them young lads, they were panic stricken. They didn't know what kind of situation they were going into. They weren't prepared for it. They weren't instructed properly. And it ended up getting really rough, and people were assaulted, and they shouldn't have been. We were treated like absolute shit by over-the-top security in the court on the way in. And so I said to the judge, when he was panicking and the chants were continuing, I said, do you want me to go and speak to them? And he looked at me, he perplexed, and said, well, if you think there's anything that you could possibly say to them to make this stop. And I said, well, I will go and talk to them, but only if you send an officer of the court down with me to take me through that draconian cordon, because I'm not going to be treated the way we were on the way in. And someone volunteered from the court, a clerk, and we went down, and she tapped the coppers, and everyone, the noise was deafening. It was like a football crowd. It really was. And people from all over the country, all walks of life, all ages, creeds, colours, and they were all there for one reason, because they knew a good man and his family were getting shafted by the system, and it has to stop. And when I went out, I didn't know at the time, but as soon as I got through the cordon, I believe it was Mickey Summers handed me a loud hailer, and I said some things to the crowd which amounted to, what we need is for you to give us an undertaking that everyone will remain peaceful today and not jeopardize the chances that Tom has, because we're doing very well in there, and we were. And what happened after that was, everybody agreed, everyone erupted in support, and there was never any danger after that moment. And when I went back into the court, seriously, I just wish I could have taken a photograph of the judge's face. Mm. Because having not let me address him and been so oppressive to Tom and me from the beginning, he had to thank me and address me directly. And from that moment, he pretty much let me address him directly. And in the end, I said to him, so you let me address you directly now, are you? And he said, it appears so, doesn't it? And he ended up writing in the transcript that he heard me as well as Tom. And then he shafted Tom and his family by not upholding what he knew to be true, which was that Bradford and Bingley, they had no claim against the Crawfords, none whatsoever. That mortgage should have been paid off by the endowment at the end of the term, and that's it. There isn't any man or woman who's ever entered into an endowment mortgage on these shores or anywhere else who doesn't enter into it and sign on that dotted line thinking, right, I'll work my whole life and pay that off, and after 25 years, whatever's left will be paid off by the endowment. That's the way it was. And look what happened.
Yeah.
Mm.
There was a huge endowment scandal, weren't there, in the 80s as well?
You what, sorry?
There was a huge endowment scandal, weren't there, back in the day? I'm sorry, I'm going off on a tangent.
Oh, don't worry about that.
Oh yeah, I got caught up in that endowment scandal. Yeah, it was a right scam.
It was. All of it is, though.
Mm. Well, yeah, as you get further down the line and deeper down the rabbit hole, you discover that it's all a fraud, and it's such a massive thing for so many people to get their head round who've been working 20, 25 years of their life to secure this home when the whole thing has been a total scam and they've been robbed.
I have to tell you, that's a great point to raise. Thank you for reminding me, because I'm glad I've remembered this. We've had a few test screenings, and we had one of the latest version. And again, even though we were still dealing with technical problems, we held one in Newcastle, and there were around about 45, 50 people there, something like that. And the reaction that we've had from everybody who we've talked to, despite the technical difficulties, they've told us that the film is one of the most powerful films they've ever seen, and that what it does, that no film that they've ever seen has ever done before, is it juxtaposes all that complex, difficult stuff to understand. It puts it in bite-sized chunks, and it mixes it with a series of action sequences that put you right in the middle of people's attempts to prevent their unlawful evictions. And some of them are successful, and some of them are brutal and violent and horrendous. And everybody gets to the end of it and says the same thing. And again, this film is way, way beyond what my expectations were at the beginning, because, to be quite frank, none of us knew where it was going to end when we started all this 7 years ago. And it was just me and Michael that started, but many, many people, all the people involved in the film, we owe so much to, because they gave so much and they gave it with a good heart. Every one of us did. The point is that what nobody actually believed when we started out making this film was that Michael wouldn't succeed, and they'd see that his arguments were right, and that the trustees would win, and that none of the properties would be taken. None of us at the very beginning believed that that wouldn't happen. And the reason that that changed is only because it was demonstrated beyond any doubt whatsoever that this system is rigged. There is no secret remedy or code. There are many counterintelligence operatives spouting bollocks on the internet telling you that, as they have been for the last 35 years. Just ask the people who've attempted to use those remedies, like Tim Turner and Winston Shrout, both of whom are currently incarcerated, as far as I'm aware. And I know for a fact that they've both been indicted for fraud, and the evidence that's been put forward by the IRS is that they've been issuing negotiable instruments using either the number from their birth certificate or the number of their national insurance or their social security number, and they've been using it as a CUSIP number, and that CUSIP number represents somebody else's interest, not theirs. Now, this has been doing the rounds for so long, and to be quite frank, as certainly one of the people listening, at least one will know, and he knows who he is, because we talked about it today. I've attempted to put all this information out on my website so many times. I've said it in so many different ways on forums, on social media, and you know what? The thing is, there's a very quick repetition with the stuff that people find of interest on social media and the internet. You know, there's so much material out there, and 98% of it, at least, is absolute horseshit. But I've only retained all of the stuff that was true. I've discarded all the rest of it, because the only thing that makes any sense at all, is that until this system is stopped, and when I say stopped, it comes to a halt, until people are no longer ripped from their fucking homes at 5 a.m. by bailiffs, high court enforcement officers, and coppers, as happens in the film. Until that stops, and everything else, everything like that, until people are not in danger of being ripped from their home on these shores, I and everybody else involved will never cease in these efforts. And we're asking that everybody, whether we've had disagreements in the past or not, or you've only just come to these subject matters, we're asking that you get behind this film, and that you get to a screening in a city near you, and you experience this film in a room full of people from all disparate walks of life, every creed, colour, religion, etc. Because when you come in a room and you watch this film, what happens is all of those differences that have been erected by the state to divide and conquer us, they fucking disappear. And everyone sees it for what it is. This is genocide! In our time. Do you want this for your children? Do you?
No, it is such a powerful film. I've got to agree with you there, Michael. And I mean, I heard a lot of people commenting after the film. Some of the comments, they were very quiet and perhaps barely spoken above a whisper. But I will say that the only one comment that was slightly negative that I heard, one gentleman said to me, I wish there'd been a bit more about the law side of it. And I said to it, my response was, I said, well, I think, to be honest, the way you're looking at it is from your perspective. And I think the film is perhaps aimed at viewers who perhaps haven't got as good a grasp on the situation as you have.
I think that's a great. It's really good hearing that, because since my major concern from the beginning is that there was too much law in it. So you see, because you're right, the whole point is the world doesn't change. There are many brilliant, wonderful YouTube documentaries out there, but the world doesn't change because of YouTube documentaries. The market is completely saturated. The competition is endless. But when a film breaches or bridges between the alternative whatever that means, and the mainstream, whatever that means. In other words, when there's a film, and I'm putting it on the record now, and this is corroborated by the people who've seen it, they've recognized, despite those technical problems we encountered, once those problems, which are just, they're very simple things to sort out, and they have been sorted out now, this film is a barnstormer. This film is a film which challenges everybody, no matter what you think about mortgages, to sit down and watch the stories about people's lives being so thoroughly, sometimes adversely, sometimes the pain of watching the people in the film, all the protagonists, go through the evictions, the trauma again and again. I've been a broken man on the floor. I mean, I'm not exaggerating. To relive this again and again has been a very difficult experience. And the reason why I've carried on doing it until it was finished is because out of everybody involved, I'm the only one who hasn't lost a property during the course of making the film. And my job is to tell this story using the tools and the abilities that I've developed over the years. And to be honest with you, I'd rather nobody knew who the fuck Michael Obenissia was. I'd rather that. I've never courted publicity. I've never courted popularity for one reason. I've never wanted it till I realized what it was. But if it takes me getting up on any platform and shouting about this film till it's been seen by enough people for there to be radical and immediate and long-lasting change, and that means the end of institutionalized mortgage fraud and the end of anyone having any danger of being ripped from their home by all the Queen's men, then that's exactly what I'm going to do.
I can see where you're coming from there, Michael, because I've had quite a few people ask me since I've been doing the radio thing. Okay, you're trying to sort out the ills of the world and the corruption and the deceit and the psychopathy and all that. What would you do if all that gets sorted out? And without thinking, I've always said, well, it's easy. I can stop doing it. I'll just go away and do something I enjoy. Perhaps by the time we've got by the time we've got the world sorted out, I'll have a little parcel of land and I'll be growing shitloads of cannabis and making people well.
Yes, I can empathise with that wholeheartedly. You know, this isn't something that you can ever take on for any selfish reasons. I'm talking about what you're doing and what many of the people listening are doing. And you know, I'm talking about many other people who have, you know, we've never even come across or even thought about. The point is, what is happening now more than any other time during my lifetime, and even though it's still not enough, and it still needs to be a lot more people getting involved and actually taking action, the one thing that is happening is there is an awakening about one truth about the way the world works. It is happening right across the world that people are realizing the system is rigged, that people can't get justice. It's got to stop. And even if they don't know how to do it, just the acknowledgement of what the problem is and the acceptance of what it is, that takes you 90% of the way to finding a solution for it. And the solution, well, in one sentence, anarcho-nationalism.
Okay, and can you elucidate a little bit on what that is for us all, please?
Narco-nationalism is the belief that we need a nation of people without government who share certain mutual values and agree to live under a certain code, and that code is a simple code of natural law. It's been described in many different ways, but the best way to describe it is the only law you really need to know is that you should do no harm and you should take no shit from anybody. That's it. That's what equity or justice or fairness is. That nobody does anyone any harm and no one has to take any shit. Well, how much shit are we going to take?
That is a brilliant question, Michael, and I think it's one that each one who's listening to this can answer for themselves. I have got a question from someone new in our chat room tonight, and welcome to Raconteurs News to X3 Dre, and also welcome to Sentient One and to Moody Mudshark. I know that's one of those is our mate Alan, who I know he doesn't listen very often live, and it's great to have him listening in. But X3 Dre asks, which I think is a very important question, I think it was slightly remiss not to have asked it before, is this film going to be released worldwide on the net, Michael?
Yes, but it's going to be released worldwide on every medium, including broadcast terrestrial TV, right around the world.
Wow.
And it's going to be seen in cinemas first, right around the world. We've got people asking for screenings in Australia, in Canada, in the US, in the rest of Europe, and all over the UK, or all over Britain, rather. And it's going to be released on DVD, it's going to be released on Blu-ray, it's going to be released for streaming, and it's going to be released for download. And it's going to be also available to anybody who can't afford to buy any of those mediums. And eventually, last of all, when it's been released on every medium and it's been ripped and pirated all over the world, it will be released through all our channels for free. But the reason why it's not going to be released like that first is because most people don't know this, even though it's been in a statement on the website, on the TGBMS website, the GreatBritishMortgageSwindle.net, since the beginning, that after paying all the costs of production and distribution, and getting it out there. And what we're going to do is make sure, and from the beginning this has been the intention, that all of the returns that come back to us will go to make up all of the losses that the protagonists of the film have incurred. In other words, Tom and his family will, from the returns, in the event we get enough to replace the home that was stolen from them by the state, as will everybody else. Michael, the other Michael, the Alberts, and also the properties that were stolen from my family. And apart from anything else, this we're doing in trust, because there's virtually no chance that those people are ever going to recover their position without us doing it. So when you support the film by acquiring it in any medium or seeing it in any place, you will be supporting a very, very worthwhile enterprise.
That is absolutely a terrific way of channeling those funds, Michael. And I can't see anyone who would disagree with the way you're doing that. It's a fabulous way to go.
Only the usual shite-hawks would have any complaint about it.
Well, yes, we've had a few comments flying across the chat room, which I thought it was prudent to ignore tonight. But yeah, I mean, that's something I suppose we might as well. You've addressed it slightly, but you know, all this trolling business. Yes, okay. There's some people that don't agree with parts of what you've done or how you've done it, but for God's sake, rather than set about and try and destroy Michael and bring him to his knees, for Christ's sake, we're all after the same thing. We're all after a fair, a just, and a free society. For Christ's sake, get behind him, back him, because
you see, I really appreciate what you're saying. I really do, but it's not required for one reason. I don't give a fuck, and I'm not even aware of what they say. And you know what? Every time they try to so-called destroy my reputation, do you know what happens? They get attacked by people I don't even know and never find out about, except by accident. But when I do, they always say the same thing. Keep doing what you're doing, son, because we're right behind you.
Yeah. Well, X3 Dre, who asked that question there, has just posted in, this could affect the whole planet mortgage system. This is amazing. I'm in Barbados and we're listening to Michael, an amazing man. In Barbados, it's known as Little England. So we've got listeners out there in Barbados. I know we've got a very active group over in Canada who's listening. And I'm sure they might be taking steps towards getting the film shown up there. And I know we've got quite a few tie-ups with the States now, so hopefully we'll be able to get word out over there as well.
Yes, that's all wonderful, wonderful stuff, wonderful stuff. And again, to anybody who is in a position where they want to bring the Great British Mortgage Swindle to a cinema near them, wherever they want it to be, all they got to do is get in contact with their local cinema, put the idea to them, and if they're happy to at least take it forward, to get in contact with either me or Michael, whether it's through Facebook or through Twitter, or by contacting us through our various websites, selfrealization.com, thebenissian.net, roguemail.org, thegreatbritishmortgageswindle.net, etc. Just get in contact and we'll take it from there. Because, as I say, this isn't something that I'm trying to sell to you in a way that is anything other than a representation of the truth that has been. It's become so apparent to me, every test screening of this film that we've had, it doesn't matter who they are, the effect of the film is life-changing. And the reason is because it doesn't leave you bereft of all possible recovery from the situation. It leaves you with the indomitable feeling that despite all the odds, the people on these shores, like before in different times, the people on these shores will only take too much shit, just like the people everywhere. And you know what? They've already given us too much shit on these shores. And when the 40 million plus people who live in void mortgage properties in Britain, when they realize just how much they've been shafted over mortgages, it will end. It will end. And that's why we're looking to get as many people into these screenings, to get disparate people together so they can not see their differences. So they only see what they have in common, which is we all have a natural right to a roof above our heads and some land to raise a family and grow food with clean water and clean air, without the skies being sprayed with shit, etc.
Yeah, it's like I would call it a blanket of tyranny, but I do see. Do you see any hope in future? Anything that's sprouting? And I know you mentioned that there seems to be some sort of something happening worldwide, and people are looking for different ways and different things rather than what they've been used to and what they've had shoved down the throat. Do you think that we're on the verge of breaking through, of breaking down this barrier of crap?
No, I don't. And I wish that was the case. I really do. I don't think that at all. I think, as I've instinctively felt for probably the last 10 years at least, that at some point in time, no one can gauge properly and accurately when, but at some point in time, the system would implode. And that's what's happening. You go to any county court and you ask a member of the staff how many litigants in person are coming in challenging their mortgage. And I can promise you, they will have a sharp intake of breath, sigh, and then say words to the effect of a lot or too many. And I have it from the very judge who started off our miscarriage of justice, Walton, who told the ex-trustee, the lawyer who had to resign, Tim, who told him at a dinner when we'd begun our case, where would it all end if you won? And Tim said, well, if you listen to Michael, it will end with the end of the conveyancing industry. And that, I think, is what we're so close to happening. And the evidence of this, can you imagine N.M. Rothschild and Son, who have so much control and have had so much control for so long over so many things on this planet, not just here, all through banking fraud. Can you imagine a situation where they are not able to set themselves up with a private buyer, a corporate entity, who agrees to buy the land registry? Because I've found it very difficult to imagine that they wouldn't find some stooge until all the experience we've had dealing with insurance companies and professional negligence issues, suddenly I had a revelation about it. The reason why the land registry deal hasn't gone through is because if everybody made the same indemnity claim that we've already succeeded in making, remember I told you, once all the receiver's entries are removed, all the losses for all the stolen, fire-sold properties come back to the trustees from the land registry. If everyone gets that same result, the only legal entity capable of underwriting those losses is a government treasury. Therefore, no corporate entity on the planet has been able to get insurance for buying the land registry.
You're very quiet, Andy.
Yeah, sorry about that. My usual trick of muting my mic and getting distracted. And I've completely forgotten what I was going to say now, so over to you, Jason. I lost my thread.
In the answer that you gave, you did say that you didn't see an end in sight, but then you sort of gave us an indication that things are happening, and then things are. It's a bit of a double-sided coin, that
it
really.
Is, yes, because that's the system. It's not because of what we're doing; it's because the system's imploding, and that's a very good point to raise, because that's the end of the point that I'm making, or that's rather the subtext, that it's imploding. Because whilst the staff at the courts generally are part of the problem or don't give a shit whether there's a problem or not, they're just doing their job, so leave them alone. The people at the land registry, our experience has been, if you're not dealing with the head honchos like the chief land registrar and some of the land registrars in the local offices, if you're not dealing with those people, the rest of the staff are not only helpful and polite. The staff we've been dealing with have been horrified at what we've revealed to them, and they have, after all these years of trying, finally agreed that we're correct, and that the only thing stopping all of our applications from succeeding is the court order from Berens, where he issued the bank a declaration that they were able to create, or the court was able to create a mortgage over Ashcombe House. And it's a completely illegal mortgage, and they've never been able to enforce it, and that's the reason why, one of the reasons why they haven't been able to sell the property. But the land registry has accepted that that is the only thing stopping all of our applications succeeding. Now let's just put this in perspective. In the event that happened, all our applications succeed, which we're on the brink of, the system is going to pretend, and all the trolls on the internet are going to pretend that I'm making it all up, and that it's not true, and that we didn't do what we've done, which they've been doing that since the summary judgment victory in 2014 over the Section 1.3 point anyway. So it's nothing new. But something that huge, if that becomes public knowledge overnight, as it will, in the event the film explodes the way I know in my gut it's going to, the land registry staff are going to be on our side. They're not going to be on the system's side. And that's why it's the system that will collapse, not because of anything that we do from henceforth, but because of everybody who has and continues to stand up against it and refuse to accept its validity. So that's really why I'm positive. That's why I think there is reason to continue, but there's no one thing we could do. There's no one act a government could make that could solve the problem. It's only that the system collapses in on itself, which I think it is in the process of doing. It's just how long it's going to take, that's all.
Yeah, it certainly looks like the banking system is tottering. It's propped up with matchsticks and toothpicks in all directions. And from what I've seen the last couple of years of the mortgage and conveyancing system, it's looking very, very tottery.
Yes, it is. But they continue building more. They put more layers of bullshit onto layers and layers of bullshit, and there's only so long it can continue. There has to be. The one thing I've learned in life is that everything in the end must have an end, Well, there's never been an empire that lasted more than 200 years without crumbling, for whatever reason, in known history. The Rothschild Empire was formally established through the Battle of Waterloo. And what Nathaniel Rothschild did in 1815 in the stock market by crashing it, by publicly selling all of his stocks and then secretly employing proxies to buy it up for pennies against the original price. And thereby the House of Rothschild and the five brothers and the five cities took control of 92% of world trade, including the crowns of Europe, the surviving royal dynasties of Europe, and including the Vatican. And the reason why they were able to do that, well, they got them into hock. They lent them money to wage wars for centuries, and they never paid them back. They forgave the debts in return for the power that they've enjoyed largely without the knowledge of the vast majority of the people on the planet.
Yeah, I think that quote from my Amschel Rothschild is kind of quite pivotal in that. You know, give me the power to create money, and I care not who sits on the throne.
Exactly.
But it's been absolutely tremendous talking to you, Michael, and it was a pleasure to meet you last week. The film is absolutely sensational. And before we go, I'm sure there's a few people you'd like to give a shout out to, because there's an awful lot of people put a great deal of work into that film. Would you like to mention some of the people who've contributed?
Of course, yes. I'd like to pay tribute to everybody involved in the film in any way, because there are some whose names I don't know because I've never had any personal relationship, but I've seen them so much, and within the course of editing the film. And you should also bear in mind that of the footage, the film is 98 minutes long, but the footage that I've been cutting from is 10 times more than that. So there's a lot more that hasn't been seen that has to stay on the cutting room floor. But of the people involved who are in the film and who worked on the film, who absolutely deserve enormous tribute. First of all, I have to say, one of the bravest and most articulate and calm young men under pressure I've ever encountered is a guy called Michael Albert, who fought the good fight for his family. And equally the same things apply to his mother and his father, Elizabeth and Jersey. They never gave up, and they still haven't, and they won't back down until they do get some kind of redress. And when you see what was done to them, and I must also pay tribute to a woman called Songbird Ascending, who also used to go by the name of Paula, who assisted them in their fight, which was probably the most traumatic eviction that I'd ever seen, which is, as I was alluding to before, was at 5:30 in the morning. Elizabeth was dragged down the stairs by her feet by these fuckers. By her feet. Pulled out of bed and dragged down the stairs by her feet out of her property. And it was just what they went through, the courage that they showed is a true inspiration. The fight that Michael O'Dara put up from the beginning, and Remy, his housemate, the way they launched the most sophisticated resistance to this fraudulent, institutionalized bullshit that I think had ever happened up until that point in time. They inspired so many, and all of the people who rallied round them from Nottingham, some of whom I do know, like Steve and Mel, and I also have to say Mark Salon and his wife. They were all there from the beginning, supporting the resistance. And there was, in every single example of people remaining strong, standing shoulder to shoulder, and not letting any bullshit divide and conquer, there's never been anything of any nature I've ever been involved in that I've been more proud to be involved in, except, my little family.
I think you're absolutely right to be proud there, Michael. The messages are flooding in. I'm getting personal messages on Facebook, on the chat room. I'm getting them in Skype. Everyone's wishing you well. And I'd just like to read one out from one of our most ardent supporters over in Canada. That's Rick Dwyer, who was in the film Run from the Cure with Rick Simpson.
All right, yeah.
And he says, Andy, can you please thank Michael for me? What a pure heart he has. And
thank you very much, mate. That's lovely.
I think that song in the break there, it said it all. It was just perfect for tonight. A Heart of Gold. And you've helped so many people, and I'm just full of admiration for what you're doing. And I'd like to say that any time you want to come back on Raconteurs News, you're more than welcome, Michael. We'd love to have you back.
It would be an absolute pleasure, and it has been an absolute pleasure. And I'd like to thank everybody for tuning in. And I would also just like to say one other thing. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk tonight, because it's been, as I say, an absolute pleasure. But also, what I really appreciate is the way that you've directed things towards the real issues. And I think that's what we all have to do. And I just want to thank everybody from the bottom of my heart. It's been a lovely night. So all the best, and I'll speak to you soon. Hopefully.
Yeah, it was great speaking to you, Mike. Sorry. It's been great speaking to you, Michael. It's been fascinating, and you can hear in your voice how passionate you are about this and how sincere you are about it as well. So I wish you all the best with the film and everything in future.
And just for a little encouragement, I'd like to say that we've had more live listeners tonight than we've had at any point since our first show on Raconteurs News with Chris Spivey, which went absolutely mental on the figures. So that's obviously down to you, Michael, doing a fantastic job. And I'd just like to say thank you to everyone who's listened in tonight, and special thanks to Toby Lee, to Webbo, to Dave Jarvu, to Unique Lee, X3 Dre, and all the others that have been posting links and supportive comments in the chat room all the way through the show. And before we go, I better just let you know that next week is a bit of a special day, because it's the 53rd anniversary of the shooting of John F. Kennedy. And to mark that occasion, we're going to be joined by the most accomplished JFK researcher that we know, and that's the one and only Chuck Ocelli, who's normally on before us on Raconteurs News, or soon to be Autonomous Media. And we'll be joined by Chuck, and he'll be doing something very special to mark that anniversary. I'm really looking forward to that one. We've got all the usual shows on Raconteurs News, but now I would need to just mention to everyone before we go that Autonomous Media is our new media hub, and that will be fully up and running from the end of this month. So when you want to listen to the live shows, go to Autonomous Media. There's a chat room in there. You don't need to be a member to log in. It's a little bit glitchy at the minute, but we're working on it. It's still a work in progress. And by the end of the month, it's all going to be running smooth as clockwork. So thanks, everyone, for listening. Thanks, Michael. You've been absolutely fabulous. I knew this was going to be very special, but it went even beyond my expectations. Thank you, Jason. So sorry we couldn't have you in for the first hour, mate.
No worries, mate. No worries.
I'm going to go, and I'm going to chill out, because I've had a fantastic evening, and I hope you all have. Thank you so much. And we're going to play out with a song that oh, yes, sorry. But before we play out, we've got something I promised I mentioned tonight. Paul Webster, who put some of those comments in the chat room, is speaking at a meetup this weekend in Nottingham at the Navigation Inn. So if you can possibly get there, I believe it either starts at midday or 1 o'clock. Always a well-organised meeting, and I'll be attending, certainly, with my other half, and I think Jason's going to try and get there, so do come and say hi to us. It'd be great to meet you. And Paul Webster will be doing his talk on gas, water and electricity. Always brilliant information from Paul. And I don't know, he might even be touching on council tax, because he's been doing a lot of work on that as well. So thanks, everyone. We're going to play out with a song I was inspired to play the last one by your story, Michael, and it fitted so perfectly. But this one was written and performed by a friend of ours, and it was actually inspired by Tom Crawford's Eviction. So we're going to leave you, and we're going to play out with I Chinned a Bailiff by Ken. Thanks, Ken, and good night, everyone.
Chinned the bailiff, but I did not hit no policeman. Oh no, I say I chinned the bailiff, but I didn't hit no policeman. Going up in my garden, they're trying to break the door. They want to steal my possessions, 'cause a banker man, he wants more. But I say, I chinned the bailiff, but I swear it was in self-defense. I chinned the bailiff, oh, and they say it is a violent offense. Bailiff man always hated me. He wanted to make me go. When I asked for the warrant, he just smirks, and then he just said no. Chinned the bailiff, but I swear it was in self-defense. I say I chinned the bailiff, but I swear it was in self-defense. He was a big boy. For 25 years I paid my way. The banker, he want more. Man says I can't stay, now he's breaking down the door. I can't take no more. I chinned that bailiff, but I did not hit no policeman. Oh no, I chinned the bailiff, but I did not hit no policeman. My reflexes got the better of him when he tried to throw a punch. I dodged the blow and I took him down. And now he's out to lunch, and it only took one punch. I say, but I did not hit no policeman. Oh, no, 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 no. I say, I chinned that bailiff, but that policeman come nowhere near me, man. For 25 years I paid man says that I can't stay.